Hi, my name's Cameron Miller, and this is Trinity Place in Geneva, New York, and this is Trinity Sunday in the Episcopal Church calendar. And if you're a liturgical sort, you know that this is Trinity Sunday, the week after Pentecost, earmarked to celebrate the so-called Trinity. And you know I can't do that, right? The idea of the Trinity is as good an idea about God as any, and it's a product similar to Peter's idea of building three booths when standing beneath the image of the Transfiguration, when Moses and Elijah and Jesus were hanging out together talking with God on the clouds. Poor old Peter sees that, and immediately his thoughts turn toward building a shrine to hold the supernatural mysticality of something beyond any form or any expression. And likewise, the church built the Trinity, the idea of the Trinity, to hold something it didn't understand and couldn't really describe. So the Trinity is an attempt to hold and codify awe, which, of course, is a fool's errand. Though this sermon is about awe, but it starts by noticing the relationship between the ability to enter into change and our openness to awe. I love that poem by Ellen Bass. This is where I yank the old roots from my chest like tomatoes we let grow until December, stalks thick as saplings. And then she writes about the arduousness of that, and the last line bangs it home: I change. This is where I yank the old roots from my chest. I change. When the angels of our better nature are guiding us, we manage to change as change ushers us forward, an army of unseen specters forming the chute down which we trod. We stumble and resist, of course, and whine and yell, but we're able to walk forward one step at a time until we enter the change, and then we adjust and finally acknowledge that it wasn't that big a deal after all. But often, if you're like me, change is fearsome, and change is full of angst, and it's a process fraught with pain and struggle, mostly of our own making and resistance to change. Like Nicodemus, I so often wander life's hallways in search of solid railings to hold on to, the definitive answers to guide me, the clear manifestos to frame the certain edges of life. But God knocks me silly, concusses my penchant for orderliness and planning, and creates shock and awe like Isaiah, stunned and cauterized by spiritual hallucinations crowding his dreams. It can also be like the proverbial farmer who scatters seed everywhere, in the soil, on the path, in the weeds, God's zealous abundance and sloppy love, weeping beyond and through any sense of boundaries. We want it to be tidy and precise and measured out, and for those who deserve it. But God invariably slaps our frugality in the face with total abundance. We think we are well and balanced and open to the Spirit and to the love of God, but we all have a Nicodemus living inside of us, and sometimes he or she gets control. You see, our inner Nicodemus is smart, probably pretty well read, and nobody's fool. He or she is the successful one, maybe a little grandiose, but a good steward of his or her own reputation, always concerned about what others think and say about us. The Nicodemus inside is quite concerned about staying within the lines and operating by the right beliefs, sanctioned by the right people. Nicodemus is always shocked to discover that he or she has been following the wrong person, or believing the wrong things, or that even though he or she has oodles of information, critical pieces of data are still missing. In short, our inner Nicodemus is cautious cautious with what he or she has, cautious with what he or she is willing to let go of, cautious about surrendering to the mystery of all. Nicodemus lives in our head with a slight to severe disconnect from our body, and a little too awkward toward the stunning sensual splendor of the world all around us and within us and among us. We all have a Nicodemus inside, and sometimes he or she gets control. When that happens, when that Nicodemus gets control, we have great difficulty encountering God. Difficulty actually experiencing God. Difficulty seeing and feeling and knowing God in the little things of our small world. The bigger Nicodemus gets inside of us, the smaller our sense of God's presence is among us, and the smaller it becomes around us. And the reason, of course, is that Nicodemus wants and needs control. And God will not be controlled. All of us, every single one of us, seeks to control God. An undomesticated God is simply too unpredictable, too dangerous for our comfort. And so we do things like we bargain and define and pigeonhole. It's a universal human tendency, so there's no reason for any of us to deny it or feel badly about the fact that we do it. It is who we are. It is what we do. It's what it is to be human. So the task is to shrink our inner Nicodemus to a manageable size so that we oversee him or her instead of Nicodemus managing us. On Trinity Sunday, it's good for us to return to the beginning and remind ourselves of the first principle of our religion, because it's also how we manage Nicodemus. It can also be an example of when Nicodemus manages us if we don't adhere to that first principle. The first principle of our religion, of our spiritual wisdom, is revealed, of course, in Exodus, the first story in the first book of the Bible, if we go by history instead of by editing. It is where Moses encounters the burning bush, and I think I've drawn upon this biblical moment 3 times just since Lent. That should serve to underscore how fundamental it is. It's not unlike Nicodemus encountering Jesus' strange mysticism when what Nicodemus really wants was a few simple concrete answers. Or not terribly unlike Isaiah encountering the 6-winged creature waving a hot coal when all he really wanted was to worship in the temple. That's the first encounter, by the way, between God and Moses, the one in Exodus that I'm referring to. And it sets the pattern for all future protocols and encounters between God and humankind. It is stunning in its simplicity and its spectacularity. Moses is told at the burning bush in no uncertain terms that he is encountering the God who was and is and will be. He's told that God, the name of God, is I will be who I will be. In short, God will not be defined by any doctrine. Let me repeat that on Trinity Sunday. God will not be defined by any doctrine. No dogma, no pronouncements. God will not be controlled. That's the first principle revealed on a secluded mountain in the presence of a burning bush. God is not manageable, not knowable in any human sense, not definable or measurable or predictable. Go on, God says to Moses, you don't get to know who I am other than what little I'll give you from time to time. So just deal with it. Of course, the entire history of Israel and of Christianity is the history of trying to put God into a box and domesticate God for our own purposes. The Nicodemus inside religion and the Nicodemus inside all of us sure doesn't want to hear that God will be who God will be. It wants to define and manage and predict and explain God. We know how that works. But we also know that's not how it's supposed to work. So if we want to manage our inner Nicodemus, or the really big one inside religion itself, what we need to do is find ways to feast on awe. Feast on awe. Feast on awe. Our daily spiritual diet, if we can do it, needs to include stuttering over God's wasteful abundance. It needs to include staring at confounding mystery. It needs to include pondering over grace that seems too good to be true. We need to ingest awe over the big things and little things too. Awe over simple, ordinary things we usually take for granted, like memory. The very fact that we have memory, to just stutter over that. Awe over big stuff too, like the moon, 230,000 miles away from the earth, and yet its pull on the oceans is so hard the tides roll in and out. Stuttering over amazing things like hummingbirds, and over mundane things like the planet Saturn blazing low in the night sky. Awe over outrageously wasteful abundance like the existence of wombats and Shetland ponies. And over nearly everyday things like 237 shades of green in the pastures and vineyards and hills. If we can ingest a steady diet of awe over things big and small, then we can shrink the Nicodemus inside and grow our hearts a size bigger. We do that, our hands will unclench, our minds will roll open, the door to our heart will creak ajar, and that will lead us to encounter God, to experience God, the one that is actually present in our midst, even here, even now. Now that's something awesome to chew on. Peace be with you.